Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Ryan McDo, who is the chief scientist at ASAP. Hey, Ryan, how are you doing?
Hi there. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Now, Ryan, for the benefit of me, our listeners, kind of the people that read the highlights that we kind of assemble after the podcast, can you tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a natural language processing and machine learning researcher. I've been in the field over 20 years. I did my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania a long time ago. Right after that, I went to work for Google in the research group there, and I was there for the next 15 years or so. And at Google, it was a different time back then. The company was really an IR company. We saw problems through the lens of information retrieval, data mining, natural language processing, and machine learning. We're still, I would say, even a little bit of a backwater back when I joined. And so, I was kind of there for the whole ride when machine learning really picked up, deep learning came in, and all of a sudden every service was powered by machine learning in some way. When I was there, product search, Google Assistant search, ads, Google Cloud. There was kind of nary a product that dealt with text that I didn't work on at some point. And it was a really interesting time and really to see the field explode that way. But yeah, so probably 5 years or so ago, I got interested in enterprise machine learning, enterprise services, because it kind of offers a huge number of different challenges over typical consumer services. You have to build these systems. The expectation for accuracy is much higher. They have to deal with a bunch of different domains, be much more specialized, and it makes us think differently about how we build these different systems. And around that time, I was introduced to ASAP and the huge number of problems in customer care and CX that require AI, and I got really excited about the sets of problems in ASAP and the people there, and so I made the move. And in the past 2 years, we've been building generative AI, large language models, applying them to just a number of tasks from agent augmentation to agent training. Yeah,
I mean that's awesome. I mean that's kind of one of the things is that because you're steeped in this kind of technology, right, that's just sort of exploded into the, I feel like crumbs. You could actually, you could call it the mainstream now with the announcement of ChatGPT back in November. And I was actually in another conversation. I said to somebody, I wonder if ChatGPT is probably the fastest positive eponym or something that's ever been created. You can generative AI, is ChatGPT going to become like Hoover and Google and Kleenex and so on and so forth to kind of this, we'll use a brand name to describe a particular kind of function. And so I thought it was interesting. But it's fascinating to watch all that development over the last kind of few months. But given all your experience of that, I mean, I wanted to ask you about your view on the announcements and developments of the last was it 5-6 months? 5 months at the time of recording, I guess. And because it's a bit or has this been coming for a while?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a bit of a whirlwind for sure the past 5 or 6 months. This has happened before. So a couple of things, like these sorts of rapid announcements and deep learning, machine learning technology, of course, have happened in the past. One big difference now is it's much more on the public conscious, right? This is the first time where, for instance, my mother is asking me about them because she's reading about them in the newspaper or a magazine or something.
Right.
That that has definitely changed. And of course, because of that, enterprise consumers are much more aware of it, and because I think OpenAI did a really good job with the UI that they put up for ChatGPT. People can play with it and really understand the value
Mm-hmm.
that comes from that, and so people are asking about it quite a lot. But like I said, this has happened in the past. I think about pre-trained models in machine learning. So Elmo and BERT kind of opened the door. This is in text modeling, anyways. And then there was a bunch of different models: Roberta, Albert, XLNet, and it goes on and on and on.
Do you think they kind of take all their names from Sesame Street or the Muppets or something?
They were. I mean, that's kind of where it started and where it came from, right? And yeah, I mean, and so there's this rapid fire succession of developments, and it's gave you the sense that, oh, it's really hard to keep up with what was going on, and all the work was good. And in the same way now, there is, a bunch of things coming out, and all of it's really good. Part of it, though, like you said, it was in the works. Like a lot of this stuff was happening at these companies already. A lot of big companies, medium companies were working on generative AI, large language models. I think ChatGPT put an urgency behind them to really get into this rapid release cycle. And in the same way that happened with kind of pre-trained models, transformers sort of won out as the architecture, partly just because academics adopted BERT, Hugging Face adopted transformers, so developers adopted them, and they kind of ended up, winning that space. I don't know if there's going to be a winner here. There's so much space, and I think the stakes are a lot higher. But I do imagine that over time, this will sort of normalize a little bit. And depending on the use case, maybe vision, text, speech, whatever it might be, we'll see a few sort of standard paradigms come to the front and be adopted by developers, adopted by academics, and then those are the ones that kind of get developed in the future for the next big step function.
Okay, and because I know that kind of you said that ASAP's kind of focus is, particularly right now, is on advancing AI to augment human activity, particularly in the area of customer care. Yeah. So I guess my question would be, because there's a lot of hoopla right now, there's a lot of hullabaloo around, it's going to all these things, brilliant. But I think somebody else, kind of like a previous guest on the podcast, Paul Greenberg, said to me, he said that, so what's interesting is like I'm not really sure that the use cases have been clearly established as yet, and they haven't. And when they have, then they'll become tools. The technology will become tools, and then we'll see the real kind of like use cases drive to value and prove ROI and all those different things. So I guess my question would be is like, what opportunities does this sort of tech and tech like it present for enterprise? And then with that in mind, what are the current barriers to use, particularly in the CX and CS space? Because we have to temper this. There's a lot of like, haha, excitement, but like there's a reality as well when you smash people into go like, okay, let's do something.
I agree. I think, the opportunities, they're enormous. So let me start with that one and then sort of temper that a little bit, on like, what are the concerns? What are some barriers to entry? But, for me, like the opportunities are enormous. Really, if you asked me 10 years ago, would we be at a point with our models with generative AI that we can sort of do these sorts of tasks, tell a model like, oh, write me a poem about the Civil War or something like that, I wouldn't have believed it. I would have thought that's too far afield, and we've really made, because of better compute, more access to training data, improvements in architectures and training paradigms. We've really just made a huge jump in that space. And I think the biggest thing where the opportunities come from is the fact that these huge models have these emergent capabilities. And so this is what you see with something like GPT. You can just tell it to do something it hasn't ever been shown an example of how to do before, and it still kind of puts it together and gives you back something reasonable. This kind of zero shot or instruction based modeling is amazing, and I think this is why the opportunities for enterprise are huge, because the big challenge with enterprise is you've got to sort of live in each of these verticals. You've got to build models for fintech or FinServ. You got to build models for telcos, airlines, whatever it might be. And now that we're in this space where we can just tell the model what to do, give it instructions on how to solve problems instead of showing it thousands of examples on how to solve a problem, it kind of just makes the rapid development and scalability of these models much better. But I think, like you said, it's a tool ultimately. This is not a product by itself, and we have to kind of build a bunch of scaffolding around it so that we can get return on investments when we put it into products and give it to call centers. So there's lots of barriers. Some of them I think are going to be solved pretty quickly. Things like speed, right? So for a lot of use cases, they just have to be fast. Mm-hmm. I mean, ASAP, like augmenting agents or augmenting humans. Often you just have to do that in the blink of an eye, sub-second. Otherwise, the recommendations come in too late and you've slowed the human down instead of help them solve a problem. Right now, the really huge models wouldn't fit into that dynamic, but I feel this is the kind of problem that, a little ingenuity over the next year or so is going to really work on. But I think that the other two kind of big ones, one is just integrations, right? These models don't live by themselves. They have to be integrated into really big stacks. Like, I'm thinking again about customer care and call centers, dozens and dozens of tools that agents use, that companies use to sort of solve problems, record things that happen, when interacting with their customers, and being able, and also knowledge bases, like everything that's kind of stored in these databases, making sure that these systems operate with this knowledge correctly. And in particular, if they're going to execute actions, on behalf of an agent or autonomously, that kind of interaction has to be done well, be done scalable, and getting that right, I think, is a tricky thing. And then finally, accuracy. I mean, these models are amazingly accurate, right? But at the end of the day, there's a difference between accuracy that looks great in a prototype versus something that you're going to sort of put in an enterprise environment that people are going to sort of, rely on it being perfect if it's going to be talking to a customer, right? And so even like one error in 100 is quite problematic in that sense. And that's like getting that UX, getting that integration right, making sure things fail gracefully, but understanding the dynamics of how those systems are deployed, either in front of agents or in front of customers of those companies. Just making sure that's done right. That's hard. I think people don't appreciate sometimes how hard that part of the problem is.
Well, I think the thing that your accuracy point is I think is well made, because I think if the thing, and you mentioned fintech, so you think about kind of organizations that live in regulated industries, where like a 97 or 98% accuracy rate is just not good enough when it comes to like a compliance framework. They're like going, no, you can't give somebody bad advice. You can't call it a hallucination. You can't just call it like an error sort of thing. You have to be, there is a care element of this, there's a compliance element of this. And so I guess that's a very real thing. So I guess my question would be on that was like, given that accuracy, which might be a thing that will slow down some of the big, if you like, adoption for many kind of enterprises, particularly in the financial services sort of sector or fintech or insurance or whatever, do you think they'll try and do like, to try and minimize that risk? Will there be like a real-time learning or QA type of thing that happens for that? I'm not sure how that would work. How are enterprises likely to try and respond to that to enable them to, because they'll see the benefit of implementing it, but they also have to manage the risk, right, in real time.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a fine balance here. The compliance is a great issue. At the end of every call, we can sort of suggest to the agent like, oh, there's some compliance issue that you need to address, or you need to fill out a report, or help you fill out the report. But that may not actually be saving the agent a lot of time. And so you might think, okay, well, let's do that automatically. Now these models are great. I can just flag these compliance things and kick them up whatever procedure it is they have to follow. But you still need humans in the process there, right? And you can maybe tune the model for high recall so that, yeah, okay, there's going to be a bunch of false positives in there, but a human is going to vet those out at a later time. And I think if that's the dynamic you're working in, and you can do that in a batch environment, maybe that'll work. But certainly that's like one example of putting process around these predictions in order to make sure that, like, you are being compliant, whatever that might be. But in the real-time environment as well, this is why augmenting agents are important, right? Humans still kind of need to be there to ensure things are going right. And the better that these models are getting, we're sort of going into a space where the models are going to do more and more of the work and the humans less and less of the work, which is good. I think that means that human agents can then focus their time on handling the tough issues, verifying things that they need to verify, things of this nature. But then they might be taking out of the context loop during conversations, right? Bots are handling more parts of the conversation. Agents are only taking a smaller slice of a conversation. How do they get the context of what's happened in that conversation or what's happened in prior conversations? Mm-hmm. That customer, to make sure that when they see that little slice that they need to act on, they're doing it with the full information available to them. And I think that's the challenge. That's what I talked about earlier. How do you design that user experience in a way that we're not going to, the human doesn't have to go back and just read the whole conversation and all the metadata in order to make that decision, because then you're not going to, make the dynamics better of the system, right? So how do you design that in a way that they can sort of maintain that 100% accuracy, but they themselves are not making mistakes from kind of lack of context? I think this is super interesting and really the crux of the problem. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the design of that. Effectively, it's the conversation flow, because all of this is kind of conversational in that sort of bubble of conversational kind of AI, or rather, it's trying to allow organizations or enterprises to have better conversations with their customers, and it's how different things plug into that to kind of like enable all of that. But with the technology kind of evolving so rapidly, that kind of design of it all kind of like becomes more challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think like, in some of our customers, upwards of 60% of the agent's time is not even in the conversation, right?
Right.
It's dealing with tools outside the conversation, executing actions on behalf of the agent, looking up procedures, whatever that might be, right? And like you said, plugging all of this stuff in a way, I mean, that's huge headroom, right? If we can't have these, large generative models interact with these databases seamlessly in a scalable way, in ways that, are accurate and provide value for the agent, you're just going to leave a huge amount of headroom on the table, right? You're going to hit a ceiling there. But yeah, how do you plug that all in? How do you get that experience right? It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that when you think about human beings and think about kind of like what they're really good at, they're really good at being human beings, right? Simple, but it's almost like it's like listening and paying attention to somebody and kind of hearing tones and inflections and the voices and understanding urgency and importance and all these different sort of things, and actually thinking about. You talked about right at the beginning. You talked about, well, the game at Google back in the day was about information retrieval, and that's a huge thing in customer care around having these knowledge bases and access to information at the kind of push of a button. I think particularly if I think not necessarily in the consumer space, but say like in the B2B space, where you've got some of these companies that are dealing with catalogs that might have thousands of products and different applications and kind of like problems that come with them. You're like going, that's a big ask to be able to understand that, but having the ability to go and access all of those that sort of information at the drop of hat, or even to have it auto suggested in real time by kind of like by a piece of technology, is allows the human being to focus on the problem at hand, which is, well, or the person at hand and the problem that they have. And so I think that's fine. So, but that so it feels like that's how the do you think that's kind of how the nature of the agent is going to change, or the rep is going to change? It's going to be more about you become conversation experts, as it were, and it's the technology is there to help you do the heavy lifting.
I think that's part of it for sure. I mean, I think in particular, if you look at something like voice channel, people calling in, this is still very important. Like forgetting digital, where the interaction expectations might be a little bit different for the customer. But we've done a lot of experiments where we measure agents and we measure pauses where they're taking notes during the conversation, because maybe they have to do some dispositioning or note taking after the conversation, or they're taking pauses because they're reading articles from a database to sort of understand what to suggest to the customer or what step to take next. And these are very awkward to listen to, right? And it takes away the agent's focus from dealing with the person at hand.
Sure.
And definitely the more pauses there are, the more distracted the agent is, the lower customer satisfaction is. Like, there's these, numbers are all tied together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's partly it, right? Like now they don't have to be distracted either, because they know note taking can be done automatically. They don't even have to think about it, right? Or like, instead of me reading a whole article to get like a little snippet of information I'm going to tell the customer, that just little snippet is given to me in a very easy to digest form. And I can give that right on to the customer. That'll be like a big part of the role there, is sort of, just maintaining that conversation, making it natural, making the customer feel that they're heard, and really improving customer satisfaction. Digital, I think, is a bit more, a bit more nuanced, right? Mm-hmm. People don't necessarily expect immediate responses. It's okay if the agent goes off and does something else. So I think in the digital setting, the agent's role is already evolving into kind of the master multitasker, right? Mm-hmm. Taking multiple conversations at a time, diverse issues at one point, different procedures they got to manage, different back-end tools they got to deal with. And I think their role is just going to continue on that master multitasker, and the AI is just going to help them do that, right? And there'll probably be a switch in time where the AI is helping them be a multitasker, whereas the agent is going to help the AI be a multitasker, right? And verify things. And it's probably going in that direction. And yeah, I think in digital, there's just so many opportunities to see how that dynamic evolves.
So I was speaking to somebody else on the podcast a few episodes ago, and they were talking about making this distinction between tool time and task time. Mm-hmm. And it's about, they said about minimizing the amount of time you spend, the tool time, as it were, which is this tabbing around, kind of looking for the right sort of things, and then increasing the efficiency of the task time, i.e. the thinking time, because you're focusing on the problem and not just on trying to find the information, find the right sort of like kind of thing. And it seems like that's the way that it's going to go. But if I was to think, crumbs, I know it's a hard question, but I'm going to ask you anyway, given that you're in the weeds on this, and you have been for the last sort of 20 years, and it's hard to predict the future, but I'd like you to have a go anyway. So what do you think the CX future will look like sort of 2 or 3 years down the line? Because that's probably how long it's going to take for all this stuff to really mature, as it were. And then we'll start to see the rubber hit the road, and, we'll start, those kind of use cases, then those kind of like where the use case has been established and you actually create this tool that can deliver that kind of like value. And then there's all these other things that will probably develop. So crystal ball time, Ryan. What do we expect in 2-3 years time?
Yeah, I never predicting the future. Even 2 or 3 years, I find is very hard these days. But one thing I've been thinking about a lot is that, well, there's always been this North Star in customer care in the past 5 to 10 years, which is really, digital adoption, moving people, off the phones, into messaging. It's a much more flexible experience. It gives us the call center, many more opportunities to optimize that experience. It's better for the customer because it's, they can interact when they're free. You can start a conversation if you get busy at work. You can pick it back up later. It's asynchronous, what have you. And I think, now these huge advances in generative AI, the fact, like ASAP, we've been running generative AI for a number of years, and a number of services are backed by it already. I mean, I think those improvements in accuracy are going to start driving call centers and the people who make decisions for customer care to really aggressively push that agenda forward, because even though voice is an important channel and we can do a lot in voice, even with large language models as they are today, the sort of natural place to extract value from them is in digital. So I think in about 2 or 3 years, we will get to the space where a huge number of companies, the majority of their interactions are in digital. Probably not 100%, unless there's some kind of directed to sort of, get rid of voice call centers.
Well, some people have tried that, and then it's going to cause a bit of a, what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I wouldn't say 100% for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if we go from a world where most customer care interactions are voice to a world where most are digital. And then that kind of opens up a number of possibilities. What we talked about there, like these, agents as these amazing taskmasters, and how AI can help them sort of solve multiple issues at once and really be there for the task. What you talked about earlier, we call these agent models. So this idea that like agents aren't just in the text of the conversation, they're not just a language model, they're in all of these tools, these back-end tools that they need to interact with in order to solve the problem for a customer, whether that's like some CRM, whether it's a flight booking tool, a technician scheduling tool, whatever that might be. They're opening these tools and they're interacting with them. And there's some simple things to do there, right? Like you said, they tab around. If we have logs where we can see what tools agents are spending their time in, and a lot of times they're just tabbing between tools, and that's taking a lot of time to find which tool they need to actually solve the problem. So just automating that, but then getting where you're now automating how they interact with the tool when the information comes back from the tool, how that information flows back into the conversation, this sort of continual loop of information from conversation to tool back to conversation. Once we're in the digital arena, I think that the opportunities to exploit that are much higher than voice. Yeah. So I would say in 2 or 3 years, sort of again, like just a much more rapid push to digital, and then these more holistic agent models is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, I can envisage it seeing, because there's this statistic that kind of hangs around like a bad smell that says, nearly 60% of customers kind of like a resort to contacting support or help or whatever because they can't find what they're looking for on a company's website, yes. Right? And you look at that and go, if you want to talk about low-hanging fruit, that's like a lot of low-hanging fruit, and it's been around for such a long time. And I think the idea about generative AI, basically about pushing information and functionality and integrations right to the front end, living up to the promises of self-service, i.e., give people the tools and the access to the information they need to self-serve, because that's what people can do, right? Technology has trained us to do that. Google say, what's the one thing we do? We have a question. We'll Google it. Yeah. We've been trained by technology to do that. So it's like, it's familiar to us. And so And I think you're absolutely right that if they can do that, then that sort of shift to digital kind of becomes much, much more natural, because there also is a reality inside enterprises
Hmm.
that you talk about all these tabbing between all these different systems. It's like hardly any enterprises are on a full whole enterprise unified stack.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And therefore, integration and connecting all these different things is going to be, and having all your data in the one place is it's a nice dream.
Yeah.
But are we going to get there? Kind of like sometime in the future, in the near future?
That's the thing. Sometimes the barriers here aren't technological,
No.
right? It's organizational and investments that companies have made in these technical stacks that are very heterogeneous.
Yeah.
And and it's kind of goes back to something earlier. I said like getting the integrations right. We've made so much progress in generative AI, and it's so much more powerful, but it's going to all be for naught. If we're not thinking about that integration side of the story as well. And I think that's definitely going to be key. And like you said, I mean, self-service is a great example. And going to sort of rapid adoption of digital, as I mentioned earlier, like part of that, what I mean is this, blurring of the lines between what's on the web page, self-service, you're talking to a bot, you're talking to an agent. The customer may not even know what part, where they are, and they go from self-service to agent back to self-service, and it's not even, they're not even aware of what's happening to get the information, right? But getting that right is not just integrating your messaging platform with information from your website or whatever that might be. It's also that integration with those tools in a way that we can confidently execute what needs to happen on behalf of the client. So yeah, that's.
And also going to do that kind of again, another perennial problem, which is kind of like making sure that all the channels kind of integrate with each other and all talk to each other.
Yeah, that's right.
And so somebody doesn't go like, sorry, what's your name again?
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, like, a lot of the AI players in the space are conversational AI companies, right? And they think of AI in that sense. The next step up is thinking like, well, information flows from that conversation to tools, and from tools back to the conversation. But a lot of the information is flowing from tool to tool to tool to tool, and agents play like a data shepherd, bringing that information across, right? And if you own the messaging platform, maybe it's easy to do the conversation to tool integration. You have some foot in the door there to get that done. But the tool to tool is a lot harder, because how do they talk to each other? Different solutions, different backends, whatever it might be. But that's a big part of how information flows.
Yeah. Well, and also if you're given that kind of agent an insight into all those kind of flows, which might not necessarily naturally fit in that kind of conversation sort of flow. So, but yeah, so challenges are to be had. But like you did say that you've been experimenting and also kind of using and applying sort of generative AI for a while with with your kind of clients. And so one of the things I would wanted to better understand was like, what are you? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're doing with your customers with this type of technology and how they're benefiting? Just almost say, bring it to life. Make it kind of real.
Absolutely. So. So for generative AI, I'll talk about the tools we build for assisting agents in live environments. And so there's two big ones there. One is something we call auto summary. So this is targeted at dispositioning. When an agent finishes a call, often they have to do a bunch of tasks to close out that call. This is sometimes writing just a little, note of what happened in the conversation, maybe filling out some structured data, these sorts of things. And so that solution from ASAP is entirely powered by generative AI. And so, one nice thing about it is you can just cut off that time that the agent spends in that, right? And spends doing dispositioning and reduce time. But I think the more interesting thing, and we have studies to show this, is what we talked about earlier. Agents are often sitting down and taking pauses in conversations to write notes. What's happening? What do I have to put in the dispositioning? What are the structured information I have to enter there? And this causes a reduction in customer satisfaction. And we've seen that once the agent's freed from taking those notes, either it's going to happen, be submitted automatically, or maybe at the end of the conversation, they're just going to verify those notes from a generative AI system. They don't need to take those pauses, and customer satisfaction goes up quite a lot. The other nice thing about this is that you can build structured tags based on these summaries, which can feed into analytics, and we've helped customers understand how to improve callback rates and things like that via these structured summaries. So that's one big area where generative AI is being used. The other is auto compose. So this is something for digital.
Okay.
And we use to suggest to the agent basically what to say next. And it's really targeted at reducing crafting time, how much time the agents need to spend to write messages. And so this can be for greetings, standard endings, goodbye, thank you for calling this company, filler, like one moment, please, but also like core, meaty, middle parts of the conversation, an extra check bag is $50 or whatever it might be, right? Putting that kind of information in there. And that's actually been powered by a number of different systems, retrieval-based AI classification, but also generative AI as well for a while. And this, for most of our clients, actually powers about 80% of agent responses. And if you think, it takes on average agents, 12 to 20 seconds to type a response, you get a lot of savings this way. And in particular, in digital, where an agent might be handling multiple conversations at once, you sort of get a multiplicative effect, and you get a lot of throughput, much more throughput through the system. And the other one, which we're very excited about, is these agent models, right?
Right.
These models that the generative models, one of the great things about generative models is that they're almost natively multimodal. You can jam in information. We've seen with, GPT-4 is one of many multimodal models. That one is vision and text. With agents, it's actions. What actions are they taking on behalf of the customer? How do you sort of, represent that in a way that we can have a multimodal text and action model so that we can not just make suggestions on the conversation, but also suggestions on what actions to take and how the actions that are taken feed into how the conversation should go. So that's another big area for us.
So, I mean, that's brilliant. I mean, those are some three clearly, some very, really solid kind of use cases in there. And I'd encourage everybody to kind of go and check out kind of ASAP, because actually one of the things I think is quite cool about kind of the company is that it's almost like science first, as it were. And it's always been science first. It was like, there was a lot that ASAP kind of popped up on my radar a wee while ago, a couple of years ago or something. And it was a bit like you were in stealth for the longest time. You got this kind of pool of scientists kind of like beavering away, doing all these things. And they go, oh, look at what we made. And then it's like, it causing big kind of ripples. And so that's brilliant. So I would definitely ask people to kind of go and check you out and kind of like see some of the case studies and stuff that you have on your website and stuff. And thank you also for talking to us about, as somebody who's just like sort of steeped in all of this, who has a background in NLP and ML and deep learning and all these different sort of things, transformer models, to give us a bit of kind of context in amongst all of the hoopla. But so I wanted just to say, is there anything else that you'd like to add about all of this sort of stuff that we've missed out?
Yeah. I mean, one thing we've mentioned it before, actually I said predict, what's going to happen in 2 to 3 years. And I said rapid adoption of digital. But I do want to point out that speech is, and voice is still critical. And sometimes it gets lost, in all this generative AI and large language model world. And, this is something that we're very aware of. We have a speech team that does amazing work. Those are generative models
Mm-hmm.
themselves, like a lot of ASR systems, and they're world class, especially for the customer care space. But at least for the foreseeable future, we're still going to be in a world where voice is a significant fraction or a majority fraction of calls coming in. And I think one thing that the accuracy of generative AI and large language models is amazing, but it's only as good as the data that's getting fed into
Yeah.
it. And if you're getting fed like massive transcription errors or something like that, that's going to be a huge problem. And so this is something that I think, again, people don't appreciate. They see ASR as commoditized in some sense, but we've really been focusing on doing like end to end, right? So making sure that we're getting the right parts of the conversation right, the right vocabulary right, in order to make sure that those downstream AI systems that are operating on the transcript of the ASR are actually going to be accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're operating over the cleanest data they possibly can. And yeah, for me, this is a super exciting area. Again, it's a multimodal area, but it's really important in the customer care.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about that is somebody kind of like, I did this predictions piece at the end. I'd say I did something at the end of every year, and I know that ASAP kind of contributed to it. So, and thank you for that. Where I gather all these things and curate them and put them into sort of different themes. And one of the things that came up was how many younger folk are using kind of WhatsApp to send voice notes to each other. Now, I know my niece does this and has done it to me in the past, and I hate it. Kind of like, because I end up listening to it and then going and then typing out a response back, and I'm like, oh, you're such an old fuddy-duddy now, or you're turning into one. But it makes me think that you talk about messaging, asynchronous messaging, conversational sort of like stuff. There has to become a point when talk to us over an async messaging channel has got to be a thing that companies are going to have to deal with. And that's where the kind of the voice to text and the ASR kind of like in the response and everything. So whether you respond in a text method, as it were, you respond by text, or you respond using synthetic voice, et cetera, depending on how you design it as well. That's got to be a next thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm probably an old fuddy-duddy myself as well. I would probably type it in, but yeah, I mean, the input modalities that different people use is varied, and going to digital doesn't necessarily mean losing voice, just for the exact example you gave, right? And in that case, all the same problems with compounding errors around transcriptions and that are still going to come to play. And yeah, it's important to keep these in mind.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like people talk about customer preferences and understanding their customers and how they communicate and everything else. It's like somebody pointed it out, and I just thought, oh, that's a really interesting thing that I haven't seen anybody really tackle kind of right now. And it's almost a bit like people are kind of the young folks are using the technology in a way that, well, it's designed for that. It can accommodate that, but then businesses are gonna have to be able to have to think clearly about how they respond to that. And the technology is catching up to be able to do that and do that in an integrated kind of way.
Definitely. And like I said, one of the really nice things about generative AI architectures is that they're in some sense naturally multimodal. And so there's a huge opportunity to sort of have, blur the boundary between digital and voice.
Perfect. So, Ryan, a couple of kind of quick questions before kind of like just to wrap up. And so I think we could all agree that the last kind of few years have been odd, challenging, and probably a bit weird. And it's affected different people in different ways. And so what's one of the biggest things that you've learned over the last kind of few years in the midst of all of these kind of changes that's going to inform what you do and how you work kind of going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, in the couple of years I've been at ASAP, I realize is if you focus on business outcomes, that's, that will keep you going.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. I mean, I'm an AI researcher. I've worked on machine learning and natural language processing. I love splashy new techniques and everything, but that can get you in the door. But people buy outcomes and they renew contracts on outcomes. And this is what's hard in enterprise AI, right?
Yeah.
There's sometimes many steps between a machine learning model that has reasonable accuracy and something that actually returns on business value, and connecting those dots, whether that's just sort of user experience, getting the right telemetry data so you can, continuously learn, just being in the mind of the agent, sitting down, watching agents to understand like where are the pain points in the workflow that they have. Connecting those dots is hard, but you have to do it to get the business outcomes. And as long as you're focused on that, there's always going to be noise. Not all of it's noise. I would say maybe a high noise to signal ratio that you got to sort of see through. But ultimately, that's the most important thing, and I think that's the happy path.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's kind of spot on, and it's the path of, it's timeless as well. I mean, in amongst all the kind of hype and the ups and the downs and things, outcomes is the only thing that really matters. Outcomes for business, outcomes for people, outcomes for customers, to stakeholders, the whole thing. That's just it.
I think also for your own mental well-being.
Oh.
It gives you something. Some clarity and something to strive towards, in a world where there's so much rapid changes.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So boiling it all down, Ryan, if I was actually going to give you to kind of boil it all down and say, give me your best advice for someone listening in who wants to improve their customer employee experience, what would it be? It'd be like, complete the sentence, Ryan, ... Ryan says, do this, ...
So what I found to be the most useful thing is actually, as I just said, sit down with an agent handling a customer problem, right? Or sit down with a customer trying to solve a problem, on your services. That might be a little bit harder because you can walk in with perceived notions of what the problems are, and what machine learning might solve, and that, but it's sometimes not what you'd expect at all, and a lot of times it's not machine learning. It's just better tooling or user experience, making sure information is just in the right place at the right time, things like that. Just kind of really being in the head of the people that are using this call center technology. Start there before anything else.
Yeah, perfect. So a couple of quick fire questions around the kind of the punk things that I prepped you on before we started recording. And these are things I've been asked everybody at the end of these conversations. And the first one is, what one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to CX?
Yeah. So I would say elegant.
Okay.
Yes, elegant. But in the sort of like in the meaning, the sense of the word, where it's kind of stripped to basics and intuitive, right? Like the more technological sense of the word. I mean, right? Punk, in the way that punk music was stripped down, it was just the basics. I think that's kind of the way to go. The more we can build solutions that people aren't even aware that they are solutions, that there's AI there that they're interacting with, or that this is something new on top of their normal workflow, all the better, right?
Yeah.
So I think agent training, we didn't talk about it a lot today, but agent training is a big important part of call centers. To make sure that they know the tools, they know how to handle the problems well, everything like that. But the tools we build, at least we should build them in a way that like they require zero agent training. It just kind of pops out of the box.
I mean, we should spend, I guess, as much time thinking about enterprise software UI and UX as we do kind of like customer
Yeah.
software UI and UX. It's an area where a lot of improvement could be made, I think. But also, your example kind of made me kind of think about just a slightly kind of a bit of a punk interlude. It reminded me of John Peel, kind of back in the day, playing kind of like Teenage Kicks by the Undertones for the first time on his show, and he said, and I think he would agree with this sort of R.I.P. John, of course. He would agree with the idea that, to your point, Teenage Kicks was elegant because he was like so good. He's like, that was so good. I think I'm going to play it again. And then he played it again, and he kept playing it again and again because he thought it was like a perfect pop song, and because it was so stripped back and just kind of like, it was just it was a perfect thing. But anyway, that is a bit of an aside. So next question is, what company or brand do you think is an experienced kind of leader, and kind of why? I mean, these kind of somebody who's got it all knitted together, right? Who thinks about experience, not just from a customer and employee and a stakeholder and a shareholder perspective, but has it all knitted together. Who do you think is kind of raising the bar?
Yeah, so I might go a little out of the box on this one. So
out of the box is good.
That's right. I lived in the UK for a number of years. And I know these days there's the UK bureaucracy and government doesn't get a lot of positive press. But what I will say is that the UK government's websites are perfect self-serve examples, right? I've had to deal with them, for getting driver's licenses, taxes, moving, counts, whatever. Like there's any number of reasons that you need to get things done in your day-to-day life. And I found that, getting back to this elegant setting, the language is plain and simple and easy to digest. The user interface is obvious. There's only ever a few options. They drive you through a few questions to get to the point that you need to get to solve your problem. And there's, rarely superfluous language. It's almost always clear at the end what step you need to take. And I've always kind of admired just, the self-service magic of the UK government's webpage, and especially with respect to other governments that I've dealt with around the world. And yeah.
Well, that's a unexpected example for the kind of the shout out for the UK government, particularly the kind of the GDS, the Government Digital Service. And I know they've done a lot of work. And yes, you're actually pulling it all together and giving people like a front end, and then that helps them navigate kind of through all these different things. I think it's not without its problems, but it's an interesting example, and it's kind of like shout out to them because it was not a small undertaking to try and make those kind of changes. So thank you for that. It's the first time ever I think they've got a big shout out on here, but that's fine. I'll let them take that. I'm not going to dismiss that. I don't know what to say. Never mind. But one final thing, because I've also been asking people to kind of give us a bit of a personal sort of story, a bit of a good news story, so we can end on a high. Given it feels like sometimes, or I feel like sometimes, I'm constantly doom scrolling with this, that, and the other kind of going on around the world. I should probably go and live on an island somewhere, kind of unplugged from everything. But anyway, so I want to ask you, what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week?
So I'm going to cheat here a little bit and talk about the week. So I'm from Toronto. The Toronto Blue Jays are a baseball team there. Big fan. Even, I've not lived in Toronto for decades, but I always follow the Blue Jays. And spring training is done, and the start of the season is tomorrow, I think, today or tomorrow. And I don't know. I always feel good around the start of the baseball season. Spring is here, summer's coming. I don't know. Always puts me in a good mood.
Awesome. So, yeah. So a big shout out to the Toronto Blue Jays. Good luck for the coming season. Excellent. So Ryan, that's all I have for today. And so I wanted to just say thank you for spending your time with me today. Thank you for sharing your insight and your expertise and helping us to sort of untangle some of this sort of stuff from somebody who's been in the space for the last couple of decades, as it were. Also, congratulations on the work that you're doing at ASAP. And yeah, that's just been awesome. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.